The night the siren wailed through the valley, fear became something real, something I could feel in my bones. I was 12, sitting at my bedroom window, the glass so cold it burned my skin, breath fogging the pain as I tried to see through the swirling snow. The siren's cry was shrill and mournful, echoing off the mountains, making the silence that followed feel even heavier. My mother burst into my room, her face pale, eyes wide, voice barely more than a hiss. "Stay away from the windows. Don't look outside, no matter what you hear." But curiosity was stronger than fear. I pressed closer, heart pounding, and watched as lights flickered on in every house, one by one. Then I saw them, tall, thin shapes gliding between the houses, their faces hidden in shadow, limbs impossibly long, their movements too smooth, almost floating above the snow. For a heartbeat, I held my breath. The world seemed to stop. A scream tore through the night, sharp and desperate. Then, silence. I froze, breath caught in my throat, hands trembling against the glass. The shadows paused, then melted into the trees. The next morning, the sheriff's truck idled in front of the Miller house. No one ever saw Mr. Miller again. I watched from my window, heart pounding, wondering if the shadows would come back. That was the first time I truly understood why we had rules. But it wouldn't be the last time I'd break them and pay the price. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, I still feel its eyes. I was 5 when my family first moved to the town. My earliest memory is of that endless drive north, the world outside the car window changing from dark green forests to a white, silent world. My father's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles looked like little snowdrifts. My mother hummed softly, her voice shaky, eyes never leaving the road. My older brother, Sam, sat beside me in the back seat, drawing smiley faces in the frost on the glass and pretending the icicles hanging from the roof of the car were monster teeth. When we finally arrived, the town looked smaller than the pictures. Just a handful of houses huddled together around a single main street, a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Coldwater. Population 312. The grocery store was also the post office, and the school looked like a toy building, its playground half buried in snow. Everything felt quiet, like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something. Our new house sat at the edge of the woods, its roof heavy with snow, icicles hanging from the eaves like fangs. The inside smelled like old wood and something faintly sweet, maybe from the casserole Mrs. Hargrove brought over that first night. She had rough, red hands and a voice that sounded like gravel. As she handed my mother the casserole, she squeezed my hand a little too tightly and glanced at the woods before leaning down to whisper, "You'll get used to it here. Just remember, always listen to your parents." Especially at night. That night, I lay in my new room, the blankets pulled up to my chin. The wind howled through the trees, and the house creaked and groaned like it was settling in for a long winter. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then nothing. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows move, and tried to decide if the woods looked more like a fairy tale or a nightmare. Even then, I sensed there was something different about this place, something just beneath the surface, waiting. But waiting for what? The rules were never written down, at least not anywhere I ever saw. They were passed along in whispers, in warnings tucked between bedtime stories and the clatter of dinner plates. My parents never sat me down for a formal lesson. Instead, the rules slipped into my life the way the cold seeped through the walls, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. The first time I remember hearing one, it was late autumn. My brother and I were playing in the yard, our boots crunching over frosted grass, when Sam chased a ball too close to the tree line. My father's voice snapped through the air, sharper than the wind. Not so close to the woods. You know the first rule. Sam rolled his eyes, but he backed away, muttering under his breath. Later, I asked my mother what he meant. She just shook her head and said, "You never go into the woods after dark. Not for any reason." The second rule came up the night the power went out. The house was swallowed by darkness, the only sound the wind rattling the windows and the faint creak of the old floorboards. I reached for the flashlight in the kitchen drawer. My mother's hand closed over mine, her grip cold and tight. "If you hear knocking at the door after midnight, don't answer. Not even if it sounds like someone you know." Her voice was so serious, so unlike her usual gentle tone, that I nodded without asking why. The third rule was about the lake. In summer, the water looked inviting, sparkling under the endless sun. But every kid in town knew you never swam alone, and you never, ever swam after sunset. "The lake keeps secrets," my father said once, his eyes fixed on the shifting water. At dusk, the surface turned black and glassy, and the air grew colder, as if the lake itself was holding its breath. Sometimes, when I dipped my toes in, the chill would shoot up my legs and make me shiver, even on the warmest days. It remembers things we'd rather forget. The fourth rule was the one that made my skin crawl. If you see someone standing at the crossroads outside town, don't talk to them. Don't even look at them. Just keep walking. I asked my brother once if he'd ever seen anyone there. He just shrugged and said, "You'll know if you do." The fifth rule was the one everyone whispered about, but no one explained. Ball in hand, but something about him looked off. There was mud on his cheek. His shoelaces, always double knotted, were untied. And there was a smell, damp earth mixed with something sweet and rotten. That night, Sam barely said a word. He picked at his food and didn't even touch his favorite casserole. My parents didn't notice, but I did. Later, as we got ready for bed, I asked him what happened in the woods. He hesitated, then shrugged. "I thought I heard someone calling my name," he said quietly. "But it was probably just the wind." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I remembered the fifth rule. If you hear your name called from outside at night, no, you didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the windows, whispering around the corners of the house. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy. They creaked on the loose board outside my door and stopped. I held my breath, staring at the strip of light under the door. The shadow didn't move. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the footsteps turned and faded away. I waited another minute before exhaling. But right before I drifted off, I could have sworn I heard it, my name, whispered through the cracks in the window frame. The next morning, Sam was back to normal. Almost. But he didn't go near the woods again for weeks. He never mentioned the voice, and neither did I. Still, sometimes when we played outside, I'd catch him glancing at the tree line, like he was waiting for it to call again. It was a small thing, barely a violation, but it left a mark. Because the rules weren't stories, they were boundaries. And even brushing against them had consequences. I started to wonder what would happen if someone truly broke one. A few weeks later, someone did. Life in Coldwater settled into a rhythm, the kind that made days blur together like snowflakes in a storm. Every morning, my mother woke us before sunrise, the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifting through the house. Sam and I would stumble into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from our eyes, and eat breakfast while Dad read the weather report from the radio, his brow furrowed as he listened for news of storms or road closures. Afterward, we bundled up in layers, wool socks, thick sweaters, boots that always seemed a size too big, and trudged down the icy path to school. School was a squat building with drafty windows and a bell that never rang quite on time. Our teacher, Mrs. Carter, wore her hair in a tight bun and kept a ruler on her desk, but she smiled when she read us stories and let us draw pictures of the northern lights. At recess, we played tag in the snow, our laughter echoing off the empty playground. But even then, we never went near the fence that bordered the woods. The teachers watched us closely, their eyes always drifting to the tree line, as if expecting something to step out of the shadows. After school, Sam and I would walk home together, our boots crunching on the packed snow. Sometimes we'd stop at the store for penny candy, the bell above the door jingling as we entered. Mr. Jensen, the shopkeeper, always greeted us with a nod, but he never let us linger after dusk. "Best get home before the light goes," he'd say, glancing at the darkening sky. Evenings were for chores, stacking firewood, feeding the dog, helping Mom with dinner. We'd sit around the table, sharing stories about our day, but there was always an edge to the conversation, a sense that certain topics were off limits. If someone mentioned the woods, or the lake, or the crossroads, the room would go quiet, and Dad would change the subject. Sometimes, after dinner, he'd check the locks on the doors and windows, his movements careful and deliberate. I'd watch him, wondering what he was really afraid of. At night, the house felt different. The cold seemed to seep up through the floorboards, and sometimes the wind would rattle the windows or branches would tap against the glass, making me flinch. The darkness outside felt thick and impenetrable, pressing against the panes. Sam and I would whisper across the hallway, making up stories about the monsters that lived in the woods, but our jokes always faded into uneasy silence. Sometimes, I'd hear my parents talking in low voices downstairs, their words muffled but urgent. Once, I caught a fragment, my mother's voice, tense. "Did you hear it last night?" My father's reply was just a murmur, but it made my skin prickle. Despite the routines, the laughter, the warmth of family, there was always something underneath, a tension that never quite went away. Life in Coldwater was ordinary on the surface, but underneath, it was shaped by the rules, by the things we didn't talk about, and by the quiet dread that crept in with every sunset. And every night, I wondered what we were really hiding from. It was the summer I turned 9 when everything changed. The days stretched long and bright, the sun barely dipping below the horizon before rising again. The whole town seemed to breathe easier in the light, but I noticed the adults grew more anxious as the solstice approached. My father checked the locks 3 times each night. My mother kept the curtains drawn, even when the sun refused to set. Sam and I spent our afternoons at the lake, skipping stones and daring each other to wade in up to our knees. But we always went home before the shadows touched the water. One evening, the air felt different, thick and heavy, as if a storm was coming, though the sky was clear. The lake was glassy and black, reflecting the pale sun in a way that made my skin crawl. Sam and his friend Tyler were with me, and for once, there were no adults in sight. Tyler was new to town, his family having moved up from Anchorage that spring. He was bold in a way that only outsiders could be, always questioning the rules, always pushing the boundaries. "Why can't we swim after sunset?" Tyler asked, standing at the edge of the dock, toes curled over the wood. "It's just water. You guys are scared of nothing." Sam shot me a look, but I didn't answer. The sun was low, the sky streaked with gold and purple. I felt the old fear rising in my chest, but Tyler just laughed and dove in, sending ripples across the perfect surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water seemed to swallow him, the ripples vanishing too quickly, the lake going still as glass again. Sam called his name, voice cracking. I stared at the water, heart pounding, waiting for Tyler to surface. Seconds stretched into a minute. Then, with a splash, he burst up, gasping and grinning, hair plastered to his forehead. "See? Nothing to it," he said, but his voice sounded strange, echoing across the water in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. His eyes looked different, paler, almost silvery in the fading light, and he shivered, hugging himself, even though the air was warm. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and as he passed, I caught a faint, earthy smell clinging to him, like wet leaves and something older. We hurried home, not speaking. That night, the air in the house felt charged, as if lightning was about to strike. My parents argued in hushed voices. I heard my mother say, "It's starting again," and my father's reply, "We can't control what outsiders do." I lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle the windows, the floorboards creaking under invisible footsteps. The next day, Tyler didn't come to school. His mother called around, asking if anyone had seen him. The sheriff's truck circled the lake, but no one found a trace. Sam wouldn't talk about what happened, but I saw the guilt in his eyes. That night, I heard my name whispered from outside my window, soft and pleading, but not quite right, as if it was trying to remember how to sound like me. My breath fogged the glass as I clenched the bedsheets in my fists, squeezing my eyes shut, repeating the rule in my head. If you hear your name called from outside at night, know you didn't. The town changed after that. People moved in tighter circles, locking their doors before dusk. The laughter at recess faded, replaced by nervous glances at the woods. Even the adults seemed smaller, their faces drawn and pale. The rules were no longer just warnings, they were lifelines, and we all clung to them, hoping they'd be enough. But I knew something had shifted. The lake was different now, the woods darker, the air heavier. The rules had been broken, and whatever waited in the shadows was closer than ever. I wondered if it was already inside. The days after Tyler disappeared felt stretched and brittle, like the world was holding its breath. The adults tried to keep things normal, school, chores, Sunday dinners, but the tension was everywhere. Sam barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was thin and shaky. I caught him staring at the lake from our bedroom window, his face pale in the moonlight. At night, I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen, their voices sharp and urgent, but the words were always just out of reach. A week after Tyler vanished, the sheriff called a town meeting. Every family crowded into the school gym, the air thick with fear and the smell of wet boots. The sheriff stood at the front, his hat in his hands, and told us what we already knew. Tyler was gone, and the search had turned up nothing. He reminded everyone to follow the rules, to keep their children close, to lock their doors before dark. His eyes lingered on me and Sam, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That night, the wind howled louder than ever. The house creaked and groaned, and the darkness outside pressed against the windows. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tyler's pale, shivering face and heard the echo of my name whispered from the shadows. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, crunching the frost that had settled over the boards. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps stopped at the front door. Then came the knocking, 3 slow, heavy raps that seemed to shake the whole house. I remembered the second rule. If you hear knocking at the door after midnight, don't answer. Not even if it sounds like someone you know. But then I heard a voice. It's me. It called, soft and pleading. Please, let me in. I'm so cold. It sounded like Tyler, but not quite. The words were right, but the tone was off, stretched and hollow, as if someone was trying to remember how to sound like him. My heart pounded. I wanted to run to my parents' room, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped between fear and curiosity. The knocking came again, louder this time. Please, the voice begged. I just want to come home. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating the rule in my head, but the voice kept calling, growing more desperate, more insistent. I heard Sam's bed creak across the hall, and I knew he was awake too. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled, and the front door shuddered in its frame. I heard my father's footsteps on the stairs, then his voice, low, steady, commanding. Go back to bed. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and pulled the covers over my head. Downstairs, the knocking grew frantic, the voice outside rising to a wail. Let me in, please. It's so cold. The sound twisted, becoming something inhuman, a guttural howl that made my skin crawl. The house shook, the windows rattling in their frames. I heard my mother sobbing, my father shouting words I couldn't understand. My parents were arguing again, but this time their words were clearer, sharper, as if they'd given up trying to hide the truth. I crept to the top of the stairs, heart pounding, and listened. We can't keep pretending, my mother said, her voice trembling. It's getting worse. The rules aren't enough anymore. My father's reply was low and tired. They're all we have. If we stop following them, we're finished. You saw what happened to the Millers. To Tyler. My mother's voice broke. It's not just the children. It's all of us. The woods are hungry. The lake is restless. And whatever's at the crossroads, she stopped, as if afraid to say more. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to make sense of it. The rules weren't just old stories. They were protection, a bargain struck with something ancient and patient, something that watched from the shadows and waited for mistakes. That week, I started noticing things I'd missed before. Strange symbols carved into the trees at the edge of the woods, always fresh, never weathered. Salt sprinkled in neat lines across every doorstep. The way the adults would pause at sunset, eyes fixed on the horizon, lips moving in silent prayers. I realized the rules weren't just for children, they were for everyone, a ritual woven into the fabric of the town. When I looked closer at the scratches on our front door, I saw the same curling shapes, almost matching the marks on the trees. It made my skin crawl. I asked Sam about it, hoping he'd laugh it off, but he just looked at me, eyes hollow. They say the rules keep us safe, but really, they just keep us satisfied. As long as we obey, it takes only what it's owed. But if we slip, if we forget, it gets hungry. It's always hungry. It just waits for us to forget. And one day, I won't be satisfied. I thought about Tyler, about the thing that came to our door, about the scratches that almost formed a word. I thought about the way the woods seemed to breathe at night, the way the lake's surface never reflected the stars. I understood, finally, that the rules weren't just warnings, they were the only thing holding the darkness at bay. That night, as the sun bled out behind the trees and the wind carried strange whispers through the cracks in the walls, I felt the weight of the bargain settle on my shoulders. The stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't just about being careful. It was about survival, about keeping the darkness fed, but never letting it feast. And for the first time, I wondered how long the rules would hold. The first snow of the season came early that year, blanketing the town in silence. The cold felt sharper, the nights longer, and the woods pressed in closer than ever. I was older now, old enough to understand the weight of the rules, old enough to feel the fear that lived in every adult's eyes. But nothing could have prepared me for the night the rules were truly tested. It started with a power outage. The lights flickered and died just after sunset, plunging our house into darkness. My father lit candles, his hands shaking, and my mother sprinkled salt along the windowsills and doors. Sam and I sat together on the couch, the air thick with dread. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the sound of branches scraping against the siding, and something else, something that sounded almost like voices calling from the woods. We tried to distract ourselves with stories, but every creak of the house made us jump. My father checked the locks again and again, muttering the rules under his breath. My mother clutched her rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. The hours crawled by, the darkness pressing in, until suddenly there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, heavy raps. The sound echoed through the house, and I felt my blood turn to ice. My father stood, blocking the hallway. "No one opens the door," he said, voice low and steady. "No matter what you hear." But then the voice came. It was Sam's voice, but not quite. "Let me in," it pleaded, soft and desperate. "Please, I'm so cold." But Sam was right beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. The voice outside grew more insistent, mimicking my mother, my father, even me. Each time, it sounded a little less human, a little more hollow. The knocking grew frantic, the voices overlapping, twisting into a chorus of need. The house shook, the windows rattling in their frames. My father shouted the rules, over and over, as if the words themselves could hold back the dark. My mother sobbed, rocking back and forth, her eyes squeezed shut. Then, the back door slammed open. A gust of freezing wind swept through the house, snuffing out the candles. The darkness was absolute. I heard footsteps, heavy, dragging, moving through the kitchen. The air turned bitter cold, and a smell like wet earth and rot filled the hallway. My father yelled for us to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, heart pounding, as something cold and wet brushed past me. Sam pulled me to my feet, and we stumbled toward the stairs. The thing in the kitchen was moving closer, its footsteps slow and deliberate. I remembered the rules. Don't answer the door, don't go into the woods, don't listen to the voices. But now, the rules felt like a lifeline slipping through my fingers. We reached the top of the stairs, and I slammed my bedroom door shut, locking it and pushing my dresser in front of it. Sam and I huddled together, listening as the thing moved through the house, calling our names in voices that weren't quite right. I sprinkled salt along the windowsill, my hands shaking, and whispered the rules like a prayer. Sam, voice trembling, whispered them back to me, over and over, as if the words themselves could keep us safe. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The doorknob rattled, and a voice, my own voice, whispered, "Let me in." I pressed my back against the door, tears streaming down my face. Sam squeezed my hand, his eyes wide with terror. For what felt like hours, the thing prowled the hallway, scratching at the door, whispering, pleading, threatening. I kept repeating the rules, over and over, refusing to answer, refusing to look, refusing to listen. At some point, the scratching stopped. The house fell silent. the darkness lifting just enough for me to see the first gray light of dawn seeping through the window. When we finally crept downstairs, the house was cold and empty. My parents sat at the kitchen table, pale and exhausted, but alive. The back door hung open, snow drifting in, and strange symbols were carved into the wood, fresh, sharp, and unmistakable. We had survived the night, but I knew it wasn't over. The rules had held, but only just. I understood now that survival wasn't about being brave. It was about being careful, about remembering, about never letting your guard down. The darkness was always waiting, always hungry, and the rules were the only thing keeping it at bay. And as I looked out at the woods, the snow falling in silent sheets, I wondered how many more nights we could last. The morning after felt like waking from a fever dream. The house was cold and silent, the air heavy with exhaustion and something else, relief, maybe, or the fragile hope that we'd made it through. My parents moved quietly, cleaning up the salt scattered across the floors, checking the doors and windows for new scratches. Sam barely spoke, his eyes shadowed and distant, but he stayed close to me, jumping at small noises and refusing to sleep alone. Outside, the town was changed. Neighbors gathered in small, hushed groups, sharing stories of what they'd heard in the night. Voices at the window, footsteps on the porch, the sound of something scratching at the walls. Some families packed their cars and left before noon, their houses left empty and cold. Others, like us, stayed, clinging to the routines and the rules, hoping they would be enough. School reopened, but the laughter on the playground was quieter, the games more cautious. The teachers watched us with tired eyes, and the fence at the edge of the woods seemed taller, the shadows deeper. At home, my father checked the locks every night, and my mother whispered prayers as she drew the curtains tight. I tried to go back to normal, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. I understood now that the rules weren't just for children. They were the only thing standing between us and the darkness. I wondered how long they would hold, and what would happen if they finally failed. And as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, I found myself listening to the voices in the dark, wondering if the rules would be enough the next time. Years passed, but the rules never left me. I carried them like old scars, invisible but always aching when the nights grew long. Most of the families who stayed learned to live with the fear, teaching their children the same whispered warnings, the same careful routines. The town grew smaller, quieter, but the woods never stopped pressing in. One autumn, I watched from my window as a new family arrived, their car heavy with boxes and hope. They moved into the old Miller house, the one closest to the trees. That evening, I saw their daughter, no older than I'd been when we first came, standing at the edge of the yard, staring into the shadows. Her breath fogged in the cold, and for a moment, she glanced back at my window, her eyes wide and searching before turning away.